Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast hosted by me, Steve Parker. This is a series that brings a fresh perspective to leadership, motivation, and how to succeed by talking to a diverse range of CEOs, business managers, and world-class talent. We also offer some personal tips to help you in your career. Each episode aims to provide a snapshot into the life and philosophy of some of Taiwan and the world's most successful leaders, and to find out more about why leadership matters. In today's podcast, we're talking to True Black, who is an executive coach and facilitator who's been serving executive clients and teams since 2005. True comes from a corporate leadership background, having led large teams in sales, marketing, operations, etc. He's a certified executive coach and a principal at True Development, a leadership development consultancy based here in Taipei, Taiwan. We talked to True Black today about his experience of coaching and developing leaders and teams. And we get a lot of interesting insights, especially in the area of feedback and self-awareness. True Black, welcome to the studio. It's good to have you here today. How you doing?
Great to be here. Doing well.
I think probably one of the things that people always want to ask you about is this idea of what makes an effective leader. I mean, is there a single quality that you can point to and say, this is what makes an effective leader?
It might be more useful to define what makes an ineffective leader. Yeah, because leadership effectiveness, it depends on what aspect of leadership we're talking about. It's a broad range of skills and characteristics. What is going to be ineffective in almost every case may be more useful. And what would be really ineffective would be, I would say, starting with lack of self-awareness. So we all have dark sides, we all have shadow selves, and these come out when we're under stress. They are in place to protect and help us, but as a leader, if you're not aware of your dark sides and you're not able to manage them in the moment, there's going to be a lot of problems. That's where you get low engagement.
So we're already kind of heading off in a different direction from what I intended, but this idea of the dark self, the self-awareness, this is something that I think most leaders, how do you go through a process where you can actually one, encourage someone to face up to the fact that they've got some flaws, which, these dark sides that you're talking about. And then how do you work through that?
Well, one of the best ways to do it is to invite a leader to go through a very painful process known as a 360. So starting with a good, robust set of data.
I mean, how do you know that the data that you're getting is going to be accurate from someone, for instance, who's working for you?
My experience is this concern always comes up. What if people don't, what if they pull their punches? What if they don't tell the truth? And in almost every case, with the way we manage that process, it's fine. It's anonymous, right? And then one of the things you do is when you present it, when you frame it to people, say this is actually for the benefit of the leader. Very often we'll ask the leader themselves to send out an email or something and say, please help me out. Give me some really honest feedback here.
I had a super honest guy. I mean, if you want to listen to one of the other podcasts, you can find who it is. I'm not going to name them, but I had a super honest guy in here probably about 6 months ago. And he went through this 360 process with his team. And he found out that, to a person, every single one of them said, you never say anything nice about us. And he's a thoroughly nice guy, right? But in the process of being a leader, he developed a persona. This kind of, in Chinese is ba qi, right? He developed this kind of like way of being that he felt a leader needed to be, authoritative and kind of like, hey, you do this, and what have you done wrong in there, and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And all of his people were crying out for just, tell me when I've done something okay.
Absolutely, and that can give you a sense, it might give you a hint as to what your dark side or your shadow self might be.
One of the things that people talk about is trying to be your authentic self. But I often think that people in roles, whether it's father, mother, brother, sister, leader, politician, whatever it is, I think people have to kind of invent a role. Do you find that in your work? Do you find that people have kind of created or boxed themselves into a place?
I find that a lot of people think that they need to play a role. And I think that this is wrong-headed, frankly. And I think it stems from a lack of understanding of what authenticity really means, and then perhaps a lack of awareness around what you can do to increase your impact as a leader, how you can hone and refine and enhance the effectiveness of your communication and your your interactions with people. Authenticity without any consideration for how other people feel is failed authenticity. So what authenticity really is about is understanding your values, understanding your principles, what's important to you, who you are, your preferences, and being your real self, but also your best self.
How do you think that how does a leader kind of dig deep or do whatever it is to get to this, the A game every single time?
Yeah. As a coach, one of the most common problems I see that stops leaders from being their best as often as they'd like to be is a lack of attention to the inner life. So the way to bring your A game every day is to take care of your body. It begins with physiology, but also to take care of yourself, I would say, emotionally and maybe even spiritually.
This is a very interesting one because, a lot of the people that I've interviewed in here talk about kind of things like mindfulness, or they'll talk about exercise, the kind of importance of exercise and stuff like that. You're going a bit deeper than that, though. You're talking about a general kind of overall wellness campaign for yourself. There's a couple of days I can go without sleep, but by the time I get to the third one or whatever, then I really got to take care of myself, or else my A game goes down to about F. It really rockets down. And there are a couple of things that I think I need, which is like I need to have a moment, once a week, some moment. I need to take about 2 or 3 hours or whatever it is, where it's not about anything else, but maybe it's even just watching Netflix or something, but it's just, I don't want to call it meditation because I'm probably watching, but it's just a moment where I'm not actually focused on anything else but just nothingness, if you like.
Yeah. You do need that. You need space to explore sometimes. You need space to just sort of zone out, space out sometimes. That's actually very healthy.
But I think sometimes leaders get caught up in this, I've got to be focused 24 hours a day. I can't turn it off. I'm not allowed to not answer emails. And now with line messaging and all sorts of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. People are focused maybe.
Yeah, always on the go. Well, let me give an example of somebody who experienced this exhaustion, mental, emotional exhaustion. And then the real game changer, Stephen, was he blocked out an hour every morning where nobody could book him. And he refused all appointments and turned off all electronics that he wouldn't be using. And he gave himself an hour every morning to reflect on what was going on with his team, to think about areas that needed to be improved or optimized, to do maybe some strategic planning. Part of this exercise was also just doing some light meditation, some breathing, maybe some reading, things like that. He gave himself an hour every day to just be quiet. I don't want to make it too long, but he did remarkable things in a short time, and he did it by going back to finding himself from an internal perspective, and resting and re-energizing.
So true. I wanted to move. We've talked a little bit about leadership today, and I wanted to move on to. The whole point about being a leader is to lead teams, right? And I know a lot of the work that you do is on leading teams and how to develop teams. Mm-hmm. I wondered if you had some, tips. That's a terrible word to ask of you as a coach or a trainer, but how do you? It's such a big field. How do you go about? How do you start? As a leader, you've got a team. You're new to the team, or how do you start going in and building a team or developing that team?
Oh, if you're new to the team, the first thing you have to do is what I think everybody would know to do, and you have to get to know them.
Right.
Yeah. I suppose there are a few sort of rookies or overly ambitious people out there who might take over a team and immediately start creating new strategies and plans and so forth without understanding. I coached a guy who was just a very effective leader. He managed operations for all of China. It was several factories for a manufacturing company. He's from Europe. And he shared with me that when he took over a failing factory, actually, this might be interesting to listeners, right? It was, what do you do when your team is in trouble? right? And you're new to them. What he did was brilliant. He realized that the functional heads in that factory were going to have the best solutions to the problems that they were facing. And so rather than going in and investigating and gathering data and making his own decisions, he just went in and listened to people. He called it an involvement strategy. So he got to know them personally, and he went around and he listened to what everyone thought about what the key problems were, and from their perspective of their function, how to fix those problems. And together they created a rescue plan for that factory, and they did it. In the first year, they didn't make a profit, but the company decided not to close. They were not going to close it down. And then the second year, they made a profit, so the company had to keep it running.
So this is also about deciding what your success factors are, right? I mean, if you just decided, well, we're going to make a profit, I'm going to come here, I'm going to change things, and cut the budgets, I'm going to do this, we're going to turn a profit, but actually you hadn't improved the factory. Mm-hmm. This is almost the opposite of success in a way. But so your guys come in and done exactly what I think you should do, is get to know people. But this also comes in this idea of what a leadership and what a team is, because teams have functions, right? A lot of the leaders that I speak to over the years tell me that their job is not to know stuff, right? Their job is to facilitate other people. I mean, you have an expert in one thing. You as a leader are supposed to have knowledge or be able to kind of bring people together over a number of different disciplines. But it's not your job to be the one who knows.
Yes, and it's it's a common fallacy and a problem for a lot of leaders, thinking that they have to be experts on so many things. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a coaching conversation with somebody who said, "How can I ask somebody to do something that I don't know how to do myself?" And I said, well, let's talk about that. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why would you think that you have to do everything yourself? Why not give someone else who has functional expertise in that area? Or maybe it's a new thing. Why not let someone else go and master that? And then you're there providing the applause.
So I can answer this question because that's exactly what I do with everything. Everything in any company I've worked with for the last 30 years, everything I do is I think I have to know it all, and then I can teach people, train people, help them to, I need to solve the problems first and then kind of give them this, operating system, if you like, on a platter and say, here, I've already done it for you. It's really easy. Just follow this. It's a common, it's certainly a common mistake in my experience of my own working style.
I think it comes from these sort of historical archetypes we have of great leaders. It's the heroes and the heroines that come in and save the day. And of course, it's devastating to team development, to engagement. You create a lot of people will do that. They'll come in and sort of fix everything and master everything and take command of everything, and then people become over-reliant and dependent on them. People are passive, and then these same leaders are complaining about how passive people are.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you there. It's you need to empower people, right, to take ownership. I think what a lot of leaders are afraid of, and again, I'm not pointing fingers at myself here, but I'm just generally discussing this issue, because what I think some people are afraid of is that what if you empower people and then they come back to you with something that is not what you want?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and it comes up all the time in coaching. So my first question would be, why does it have to be something that you want? Is it possible that it's, you prefer to wear the pink shirt on a Wednesday, and this person who maybe looks like you or something, they like to wear the black shirt on a Wednesday. Is it really, is it workable?
Right.
What they've come up with?
Is it mission critical? Right. I mean, is it does it matter?
Yeah. So it starts with that. Does it is the job of your team member to create something that makes you happy, or is the job of the team member something else? So it starts with that. And then if you see that there are risks involved in what the person has come up with, right? And that's fair. Sometimes they've overlooked something. They haven't. They may not have considered implications of the direction they've chosen. That's when you coach and you probe, and you sort of say, okay, so when I hear this, I see this and this and this that's good. I always start with the positive stuff, and I have a couple of questions about something that may be risky here. And sometimes, very often actually, they've already thought about it. They just didn't mention it to you. They said, no, I thought about that. I did think about that. And then, okay, what did you come up with? And you can maintain a really nice coaching type of dialogue rather than being the authoritative sort of commander.
Is this something in your coaching and your leadership and your team's development? Do you come up against these sorts of issues?
Yeah. And there are a lot of leaders who feel like if they don't say, well, you've missed something, if they don't point out a flaw or something that they're not happy with, and they're not doing their job as a leader, they're not pushing people to be better. Okay, fine. From the side of the person doing the presenting, you just roll with that. You understand, this is your boss, and you're ready to deal with that. Yeah.
So okay, the most blatantly obvious example of this is a company I worked in many years ago, where my boss, but a number of people's boss. And the only thing he could think of at one point was, why do you use red font in the presentation? Mm-hmm. Because literally they couldn't think of any other problem with what was going on. They had to come up, and this is a leadership issue, right? This idea of you have to be able to find a flaw or else you're not the leader.
Yes, even if you have good intentions. Believe it or not, Stephen, there are people who grew up thinking that the best way to add value to any conversation is to point out problems and flaws and things that need to improve. I think we've all worked with people like that. And you can either be really offended by this approach, or you can realize that actually they're just trying to improve the quality of what we're doing. In fact, in training, if first couple of years delivering workshops, if people nitpicked or pointed out flaws, I'd get really upset. And then I started thinking, actually, they're helping me. Right. And they come from a good place. So what I would say is, as a leader, this goes back to getting data and looking at the 360s. If you come into these kinds of interactions looking for flaws, okay, and you have good intentions, you're trying to improve things, you're trying to help people be better, you still need to look at how that's landing with people. Are they getting that or not? And very often your intention is not coming through. And so you've got to make some adjustments. Sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, you know what? Sometimes I'll point out that the font shouldn't be red. And I realize that may seem nitpicky and ridiculous to you. And let me tell you why I'm doing that. Sometimes it's just a matter of, being sort of vulnerable and open with people and saying, I know I have this tendency. And here's where I'm coming from with that. And so please don't be hurt by that.
Right. I have So I developed maybe you can tell me whether this is a good thing or not, but I had a process, because I am quite an emotional person. I think you talked about awareness, right? You need to be aware of who you are. I'm an emotional person, not in the sense that I get upset or angry or whatever, but I have some days I'm super happy and some days I'm not quite so happy. Let's put it that way, and I know that about myself. And so I got to a point with the team that I was working with, where I'd walk into and I'd give them a kind of a rating today. I'd say, look, guys, that every now and then I'll respond a little bit. I'm going to respond slightly differently depending on the mood that I'm in. We addressed it. Today I'm on about an 8, just to let you know. So if you want to deal with me today, that's the kind of, that's the sort of factor. It became a joke. It became something that kind of, it addressed what was an obvious issue. I'm talking about the younger version of me here, a much younger version. And we addressed something that clearly was an issue for some people, because I had to address it in myself.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, it's you recognize. A lot of people think that they should sort of try to hide their weaknesses and flaws. Well, everybody knows anyway. So you might as well just come clean and say, yeah, I know I do. I know I lose my temper. I know I'm, I give a long backstory without getting to the point. I know I do this. I know I'm moody. You should own it, right? Own up to it and own it, and then say, here's, that's not an excuse. It doesn't mean that I'm allowed to be that way. It's just I'm telling you that I realize I'm that way.
Well, I think this is part of the trip to being what you addressed earlier, is this on your way to being your authentic self, but the best version of you.
Yes. Yeah. And then so you learn tricks and techniques like you learned. And by the way, as a coach, I wouldn't say, here's what you need to do, Stephen. I would say, what have you tried? And then you tell me you've done that, and I say, congratulations, because that sounds great to me. But I would say there also, with regard to emotional control, emotional management. I think it's often overlooked. Even those of us who consider ourselves to be centered and very even-tempered, calm people, sometimes we just bring the wrong emotion to the interaction. So there's a fun little technique that you might enjoy that I'll propose as a possible solution. I'll say, it's called check your emotions at the door. So before you enter the meeting room, you stand outside the door and you check in with yourself and see, are you at an 8? Where are you at right now? Maybe you've just had a really difficult conversation and you're feeling thirsty. And so what do? Well, you stay outside the door and take 5 deep breaths. Or if you can, you turn right around and go for a walk and calm down. Before you enter the office, check your emotions. Nowadays, it's all virtual, right? So before you get on Zoom or Teams, check in with yourself emotionally and see where you're at. Yeah, this is a technique that a lot of people I coach have used that they found very, very helpful, just to get centered so that they can bring the right presence to the interaction.
So people talk about being prepared for meetings, right? And I'm a big believer that you should, everybody should know what the meeting's for. Everybody should know why they're there. And everybody should, at least in the first few minutes, should understand what the outcomes we're at least attempting to get to. What is not necessarily often addressed in that is how you are prepared for the meeting. I mean, mentally and physically, are you, do you have water? Do you have coffee? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Are you emotionally prepared for the meeting? Are you rushing from something else and haven't really thought about, you haven't made that shift? And you're talking about developing a process to actually, almost as you go through the door, you need to be in the space where you're at. And this comes into mindfulness techniques as well, I guess, a little bit,
Sure. It's mindfulness.
Presence, right? Being present in the actual, I'm guilty of it. I think we're all guilty of it, where you kind of like, you can sit in a meeting sometimes and, you start looking at your phone or,
Yes. Well, and I mentioned to you earlier that there's, before we started recording, that there's this really cool inspirational leadership model that comes from Bain Consulting. And the inspirational leadership model answers the question, what is the single most inspirational trait in a leader? And it kind of goes back to one of your earlier questions. And the answer, my friends, is centeredness. It's exactly what you're talking about right now. So and what is centeredness? Centeredness is being present. It's listening. It's focusing on what's going on with the people around you. So yeah, as you suggest, maybe what we need to do is develop a bit of an SOP or a step where we make sure that we're able to be centered in every interaction that we have. Yeah, and if you can't be centered, maybe you have to delay that interaction and wait until you can be centered.
This is a really good point, this idea of delay, because I have actually rarely, but on occasion, I have made a choice to delay or postpone a meeting because I wasn't, not just, I wasn't ready for it. You know what I mean? It could be for whatever reason. I think people sort of live by schedules often and think, well, 10 o'clock, I've got to do this. And if I'm not ready for it, it doesn't matter. I've got to do this. And so they go in and do that. Now, I think there are things like speeches. I mean, you've got to be prepared and you've got to be ready for that no matter what. But I think it's actually okay if you just, I think it's okay for people to say, look, I'm not ready for this. Can we put this off till tomorrow or whatever it is? And that not being ready can be for a number of reasons. Right?
Sure. Well, again, there's another opportunity to be sort of vulnerable and open with people, and which, by the way, builds trust. Just to say, I'm not in the right frame of mind to be able to be present in this meeting in the way I want to be. So could we move that until tomorrow? As long as you're not doing that every day.
Well, this
then you become the crazy.
Then it ends up being part of your KPIs. Yeah, your KPIs to actually turn up to a meeting from time to time.
Yeah.
I used to work with a guy who was called the Ghost, because he would just constantly just not be there. Mm-hmm. Nobody even knew where he was, and eventually that caught up with him.
Sure. Yeah, you become a joke if that happens too much. But I think, just because that shows, what you're sharing with me shows self-awareness, which is absolutely key. So I would say, if you feel like you're not in the right frame of mind, can you get in the right frame of mind quickly? And that's where checking your emotions at the door, doing some breathing, getting some water, whatever it is that you need to do for a couple of minutes to be present. Try to do that, and if it's not working, you may have to delay it.
You've talked a bit about self-awareness, it's one of my kind of, I really believe wholeheartedly in self-awareness. I think we have to be self-aware. I feel like I'm painfully self-aware at every single moment of my life, and maybe that's overthinking, right? But there are people who clearly don't seem to be self-aware, or have learned to ignore it and go home and cry to themselves, or. But I think being self-aware is such a valuable tool. And you used this phrase, which I loved, is how does this communication land with people? Mm-hmm. You can say the same thing in different ways, or you can have different expressions, or you can have different. How do you go about, especially as a leader and working with teams? How do you go about kind of, adjusting? I mean, people have to be authentic. We get that, mm-hmm. right? But sometimes people's authenticness is brutal. Or it's ineffective in some ways because of the way they communicate, whether it's way too underplayed or way too overplayed or way too emotional or way too direct or just, how do you address that? And how do you deal with it?
Okay, so just a reminder, authenticity doesn't mean that you bring sort of your crappiest self to the interaction. It means that you're looking to bring the very best version that you can, and that'll involve some learning and honing and refining. Anyway, self-awareness. How do you get to self-awareness? First of all, you have to acknowledge that it's important. And I can say for anyone who doesn't acknowledge that it's important, at some point that's going to bite you in the ass.
It's also an irony, isn't it? I mean, if you deny that self-awareness is important and you don't have it, it's kind of...
Exactly. But at some point, life is going to force you to become self-aware, and sometimes in a very painful way. So if you want to avoid the extreme pain of being forced to be self-aware, right. just acknowledge that it's actually pretty good. I mean, there's a great research supporting that around emotional intelligence. One of the core areas of competency in emotional intelligence is self-awareness, and laughing at yourself and maintaining a bit of humility, and these sorts of things are all really important. Yeah, but in terms of how do you actually become more self-aware, and I would say a practical way. And also let's think about objectivity. Sitting there navel-gazing for 3 or 4 hours may be really relaxing, but it may not give you much insight into yourself. And that's where we go back to feedback, and not always just 360 feedback. Some of the leaders that I've worked with are, I would say, so enlightened that they actually have created relationships where they're giving feedback constantly to their team, and they are constantly receiving feedback from their team. And that's it's a higher level of connection with people, where you can just be real with each other and say, here's how I'm feeling about what you just did, or what you did yesterday. And if you can learn to not fear that and to be open to it, that's fuel. It's a power boost for self-awareness, because you're getting constant insight into how things are landing.
Do you find that there's a difference cross-culturally in the way that people can accept these different levels of, awareness, or different levels of kind of, team building or leadership advice that you work, you're working with a number of different teams and different leaders. Do you find there's a difference between, people's cultural perspective?
Absolutely. There are even differences in expectations around what people want to do in coaching that are influenced by culture. I mean, a lot of my clients, when we first start working together, they'll call me their teacher or their mentor or their tutor and things like that. And I appreciate the sort of respect that goes into that. But the truth is, for me to be effective as a coach, we have to follow a process where I am not your teacher or your... I can kind of have a mentor sense of care for you, for sure, but I don't want to be spending all of our session time telling you stories about my past and what my experience is. Okay, so definitely there's a big impact on culture. I would say the shorter answer to what you're saying is truth is truth, and that cuts across culture. And a leader in any culture who lacks self-awareness is going to be in trouble. Case. But the way that people understand things and the way that we present things to people and help them define what it means for them and its importance for them, that is very impacted by culture. And so the way I deliver workshops to Scandinavians is 180 degrees different from, well, almost 90 degrees different from how I would deliver workshops, in Shanghai or in Hsinchu or whatever. In America or Australia, the same. You've got to adapt to the cultural, the expectations and so forth that you're dealing with. Okay. But truth is truth.
Right. Interesting. You've got this idea, this concept, I think you call it like team therapy or something, the way to build, talk a little bit about this. And it's a great concept. It sounds really interesting. And I just want to hear a little bit more about what is your concept of team therapy?
Team therapy. Okay. Well, there's a lot more around, how teams develop. There's some great research, great models that we may sometimes work with, depending on the team situation. And we may not have time to talk about that. Let's go right into the screwed up team, huh? The team that focused on operational stuff and forgot to build relationships with each other. And it's very common. I'm not making fun of them. It happens a lot. And a lot of people, they come to, fair enough, they come to work saying work is work. It's not about building relationships. Okay. The problem with all of that is that in the end, you're not working with robots, and you're not a robot. You're working with organic beings. You're working with humans. And so teams can really go off they can become derailed by inattention to the softer side, the people side. So if we're going to do a team therapy intervention and, fixing a team that's got serious trust issues or, I refuse to work with this person, whatever, helping those teams find their way back is really hard to do on their own. It's kind of like you're in the battle, so it's hard for you to be strategic about finding your way through. You're in the thick of the fight, and so it's hard to have a helicopter view of how to fix things. And also, you have emotions around what's going on. So very often companies will ask us to come and sort of help them, go from good to great or to fix some of the problems on the team. Sometimes it's a longer interaction, 4 to 8 sessions, something like that. Sometimes it's just a weekend or something. Okay, and how do you do it? You do it by working on the trust among the team members, and the only way to get to that is to set up activities and interactions where they can connect as humans. I'll give you an example. We worked with a financial service, asset management company a few years ago. We did an offsite, and it was the situation I described. We had the director of investments and then someone a leader in the marketing function not getting along. They're both about the same age, both male, both Taiwanese, and we didn't fix everything in 2 days, but at the end of 2 days, these two guys were looking at each other and genuinely expressing appreciation for each other. And how did we get there? Because on the first day, we had them go through the personal histories exercise where they shared things about the way they grew up and about their lives. And these two guys found out that both of them have young daughters at home. And so when you listen to a guy that you don't like very much talking about how he feels about being a daddy to a 3-year-old daughter, and you have a 3 or a 4-year-old daughter, what happens? It may seem a little bit, mawkish or what have you, but overly emotional and, oh, come on, true. But it works.
Well, it's about connections, right? You've got to have a connection and an understanding in some way, some empathy, right? This is the basic building block of friendship in some ways is finding common ground.
Yeah. Realizing something that you forgot, which is that this person whose style I don't enjoy or who did some things that bother me, actually they're not as evil as they have a good side as well. Yeah.
People, I think in an office environment, it's very easy to take that away from people take it away from the personal, and yet somehow it's all personal. They think, well, it's just, it's an office. I don't need to be friends. I don't need to develop relationships with people. But, in actual fact, we spend so much time with these people, and things are emotional, right? Things are personal.
They are. You can't. People decide everything. I mean, this is just neuroscience. If you don't believe me, Google it. How do people make decisions? It's a mix of sort of rational analysis and emotional emotional factors, but the part of the brain that actually pulls the trigger on whether you're buying the Lexus hybrid or the gas guzzling Ford or whatever it is that you buy, the decision is made in the emotional part of the brain, in the limbic system. Yeah. So no matter how rational and objective people think they are, we're all these balls of emotion going around, and that's why we say self-awareness is important, emotional management is important, and that's why connection is so important. And if I can just plug, for anyone leading a virtual team right now, what works? What works is even more investment in connecting with people personally and seeing how they're doing. Really checking in on them rather than just getting right to the business agenda.
So, I mean, we've spoken for a while, True, but what I'm really hearing here is about building connections, building understanding, and giving people an opportunity to become self-aware, but also really investing in that relationship with your teams, understanding your teams, finding common ground, and not just treating it like it's a business process.
Yes, and it's the goal is not to become best friends. The fact of the matter is you are你们是战友. You're what do you say, battle partners. You're fighting together. So you have to have a certain degree of trust and a healthiness, a resonance to the relationships, or it just doesn't work.
You talked about an authentic self, but the authentic self has to be the best version of your authentic self. When you're out, you can't just bring your authentic self and be, well, I just like to wear flip-flops and I'm going to, walk around the office. But it's got to be an authentic self, but bringing your A game in a sense, the best version that you can be at the time. This idea of 360 reviews, which I think is super important, getting input and feedback from everybody else around you, which I think a few people are afraid of that. You don't necessarily want to really hear what the people around you are going to say about you, but you've got to learn, right? You've got to be a big boy, big girl, big person,
Yeah. I would encourage anyone listening to take every opportunity to to take an assessment. For example, Hogan, personality assessment, things like that. Anything that helps you understand yourself better, and take any opportunity you have to get feedback from the people that work with you. Nothing to be afraid of. It's only going to bring good results.
Understand yourself and get feedback. That's a great place to finish. True Black, thanks very much for your time today.
Pleasure.
You can listen to this podcast live on the fourth Monday of every month on ICRT, and after that on the ICRT website, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Leadership Matters by Steve Parker. You can also check out my social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We'll see you next time.